Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey guys. Brian Parker here, back to be your host for another episode. Here at the All Me podcast, we spend a lot of time talking about the world of dietary supplements. And a lot of those topics focus on the consumer side of the industry, which makes sense. But what about the supplier side? Today, we're going to talk with Amanda Darlington from the Council for Responsible Nutrition, which you guys will hear me refer to as CRN throughout the show. The CRN is a trade association, and they represent over 190 different dietary supplement and functional food manufacturers across the industry. Those companies actually produce a large portion of the dietary supplements that are marketed across the world. Their mission is to sustain and create and enhance a climate for their members to responsibly develop and manufacture and market those products and supplements across the marketplace. They do this in a variety of different ways, and at the end of the day, they are ensuring that their companies comply with all federal and state regulations that govern dietary supplements and food when it comes to manufacturing, marketing, quality control, and safety. In addition to that, they have their own voluntary guidelines and code of ethics that Amanda will tell you more about. As the Director of Government Relations, Amanda works with state and federal legislators and regulators all across the country to advocate for CRN's member positions, which she will get into more detail as we go throughout the show. So we're going to talk to Amanda about what current legislation she's working on, what is the current state of dietary supplement regulations, what changes would you like to see in the industry, and ultimately, how can we all work together to create a safe and healthy dietary supplement marketplace for both consumers and suppliers? So without further ado, let's welcome Amanda into the show. Amanda, thanks so much for joining and spending some time with us. Looking forward to having you on the show today.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm excited about today's episode because I think it's going to give our listeners a different perspective on supplements. We've done a lot of episodes on supplements, and it's just one of the things that we get a lot of questions about when we're out doing our education programs. And I would say that a lot of things we've discussed have been from the consumer side of the industry. And one of the perspectives that I know you and I are going to get into is the manufacturing side of things. It's the producer side of things. I know that's some of the groups that you work with on a daily basis. So I'm excited to kind of give a different side of the coin to our listeners, and we're going to dive into that as we move along and get to know you a little bit better. But as to get to know you a little bit better, we have to start with you as a person, right? So I always kind of start my podcast by learning a little bit more about the background of the person that I'm talking with. So here's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to ask you to kind of sum up your early life story as best you can. So tell me about things like where you grew up and went to school, and then, kind of what was your career path leading up to what you do now?
Great. Just a quick snapshot. I grew up in Florida, South Florida to be specific, Florida person through and through. I went to University of Central Florida undergrad and University of Miami for law school. Post leaving the Broward County State Attorney's Office, I really wanted to get into policy work and worked for my local congresswoman in her district office, and then went into legal corporate compliance for a while for Ryder Systems, the big company in South Florida and Miami in particular, are headquartered there. And just wanted to dive more into policy work. Was the youngest attorney in the office by about a decade, and just cold made the move to DC and worked for another congressman in a neighboring district and for a while, and really developed a wonderful policy portfolio, and went to a trade association after that and another company, all the while doing state lobbying, state policy work, and some federal lobbying, some federal work as well. And now I am at the Council for Responsible Nutrition and doing state and federal policy work as well from a lobbying and regulatory capacity. And the work has been really, really interesting. And all of these years, it all just gets more interesting. Every year the playing field changes, whether that's in the state or in Congress.
No doubt. And I know that your everything that you do is constantly changing, and we'll dive into that as we go along. There's two things that you said that I want to pull out. Number one, I got nervous because you said you grew up in Florida, and I grew up in Georgia, and I'm a huge Georgia Bulldog. So if you said you went to UF, we might have had to end this podcast. So we're good. Miami, I got no issues with Miami, so we're good there. Number two, the other thing that I think is really cool is like you're one of those people that kind of found an interest early on with policy work and just kind of stayed in it and went with it, right? Like it's kind of almost rare nowadays where kids are in school and you try and decide what you want to do with your life. You found something from the get-go and have made a really successful career out of it, which is a cool thing. To kind of take those interests a little bit further, like you mentioned, I mean, you're still in that policy work field, but you're dealing with a lot of nutrition issues and supplement issues. Were those things that you had an interest at some point early in your life? I mean, were you drawn to nutrition at any point, or was it really just the legal side of the position that you're in now that drew you into your current job?
Definitely, I would say both. That's definitely what piqued my interest and captured my interest in coming to this organization. Particularly, I've taken supplements my whole life. Very much has helped me personally, my own personal health and nutrition goal setting. And when an opportunity came up at the organization, I just thought these issues were so interesting. And in the past, I've dived more into legislation, policy issues, and not regulatory issues very much. And I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to see the other side of the coin. So for the last few years, I've dealt with bills moving through state legislatures and Congress, and once it becomes a law, pass it off to another department, but not here, not at CRN. I am with the bill after it becomes law, while it's going through proposed rulemaking, and after working with state regulators and various state regulatory agencies as well, like departments of agriculture, departments of health, things like that.
Wow. So yeah, you really are one of the lucky ones that not only like kind of found your calling early on, but then you got to find a specific field within that you get to work on. So it's kind of one of those things. I imagine that your job is one that you enjoy, just based on hearing what some of your early interests on, which is a cool thing. And I want to get into that position a little bit, here in just a minute, but I want to give our listeners let's call it a bird's eye view of what the Council for Responsible Nutrition really is. I gave our listeners a little bit of insight in our introduction, so they have some information, and I'll put the website in the notes as well for people to read up on it. From your perspective, what is CRN? What is the Council for Responsible Nutrition as a whole? Why was it formed? Who formed it? And ultimately, what is it designed for?
Great question. Well, Council for Responsible Nutrition, CRN for short, we were founded in 1973. We're a Washington, D.C.-based trade association, at the moment representing over 190 dietary supplement and functional food manufacturers, ingredient suppliers, and companies providing services to those manufacturers and suppliers. In addition to being a part of CRN, our companies comply with a host of federal and state regulations governing dietary supplements and food in the areas of their industry areas. So areas of manufacturing, marketing, quality control, and safety. And another wonderful note, our manufacturers and supplier members also agree to adhere to our voluntary guidelines as well as CRN's code of ethics.
Yeah, so what I think is cool about that, and kind of what I mentioned at the beginning, is you're on the other side of this with a lot of it. So you are representing and working with manufacturers and suppliers and companies, which is cool. But at the same time, you're also making sure that those companies are doing it right, are complying with regulations that we'll talk about here in a second. And you guys even have a code of ethics that they're also implied to, and we'll talk about that as well. So I think it's cool. You're going to give us a really good insight to that side of the coin that a lot of people don't see as often as maybe they should. So let's take that and run with it, and then kind of apply it to your specific role. So your title, which I've also mentioned, is Director of Government Relations, right? But tell us what that really means. What does that entail? What does an average workday look like for you at CRN?
So basically, I work with state and federal legislators and regulators to advocate for CRN member company positions, which are the perspectives of our member companies and our industry. In that advocacy, a day-to-day would be building and or maintaining or working with coalitions of industries and organizations with similar legislative and regulatory objectives, while also collaborating with our member companies and getting them looped in, and also keeping them up to date on various initiatives from all of those state and federal legislators and regulatory bodies. A quick example would be, for example, this year I worked with many industries in California, state and local industries, and also national industries like state and local chambers of commerce, trade associations from around the country, very specific industry associations like Toy Association, the Wine Manufacturers Association, to advocate for revisions to this legislative session, single-use plastics packaging bill. So that was very much an all hands on deck, a wonderful example of coalition building and organizations, companies, and associations, and state and local bodies all coming together to work collaboratively to try to effectuate this legislation. And by effectuate legislation, I mean proposing new language, proposing strike-throughs of language already included, proposing, teasing out or better explanations of certain definitions and terms. So really just nitty-gritty working with legislation and working with legislators to reach our targeted goals. And it's the same thing on the regulatory side as well. A rule is put forth for proposed rulemaking, so it allows for industry and the public really to comment on rules or new laws, I should say. And it's the same process, working with coalitions and industry to work on the language of those rules, of those proposed laws, and to effectuate our overall goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to pull two things out of what you just said. Number one, it probably wasn't a fair question to ask you what an average day looks like, because it sounds like it's different every single day.
I was going to say that's not an average. Yes. It's not a 9 to 5 at all, particularly with working with West Coast folks.
So I'll strike that question now. We'll pretend like that didn't happen, because that's not fair. But number two, I totally understand what you're saying, and the projects vary, just depending on what legislation pops up. And I guess for my own clarification, let's take something like you're talking about, this single-use plastic packaging bill, which I'll put notes to also in the show notes, right? There's legislation that's popped up in California where they're trying to get, reduce 75% of the plastics that are out there that basically, aren't being recycled or don't biodegrade or things like that. And they're trying to, improve that packaging or make sure it's recyclable or make sure it's combustible, things like that, right? So from your perspective, the members that you work with, the manufacturers or suppliers that you work with, what are they trying to do within that bill? What are they trying to change? Or is it just terminology that they want to be clarified? Or is there a motive behind it that they want, that affects their business? I mean, what are you basically pushing for on their behalf? Does that question make sense?
It does. And I think, to start overall, businesses want to comply, right? Businesses want to comply, but the question is, and where the nuance lies, is how to comply, right? So picking out your word in seeking clarification. So in this bill particularly, but as in any other bill that would come to our attention or regulation as well, if definitions are set that don't make sense, or definitions are set that or detailed in a bill or a law that is impractical or in practice is actually unenforceable, or just going back to might not make that much sense, or it doesn't make sense for everybody, right? Because all industries are different. How people source materials are different. How people use materials are different. How people test materials are different. It's so completely varied depending on what industry you're in. And for our perspective, from the dietary supplement perspective, with the single-use plastics packaging bill, packaging requirements are regulated by the federal government. They're regulated by FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and those packaging requirements our member companies have been in compliance with those manufacturing requirements. And when you're talking about this bill or other bills attempting to put different packaging requirements on products on just a broad stretch a manufacturing requirements on everyone without an understanding of how different industries utilize packaging. So for example, some dietary supplements, packaging has to be tested, like it has to be heat tested, it has to be sustainability tested, it has to be tested so that if you put on a probiotic label, for example, that this is good until January 1st, 2025, you have to make sure that your packaging allows for your product to be good until January 1st, 2025. So those type of testing that goes into various packaging for all these different products that our companies and industries around the country produce, it gets very complicated very quickly. So when you have, in this field in particular, but if you don't really have recycling, compostable, reusable definitions in a bill, and you kind of defer to the state Department of Health to draft those rules later on after the bill becomes law, that's worrisome for us because we don't know what we have to comply with if the definition isn't set. But also setting a definition is also very complicated because how are you overly inclusive and practical at the same time? That's very hard. It's hard for legislators. They're trying. They have thousands and thousands of bills that they consider. They all can't be subject matter experts on everything. Right. And that's where, trade associations come in and really play that educational role and resource role where we can give them all the information they need, be that resource to push initiatives that we all want forward. We all want to comply. We all want to live in a state or a country that promotes sustainability. These are all good things. It's just a matter of how are we going to get there? How are we all going to get there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly what I was, trying to get a clarification on because, I don't know that everybody understands how complicated these things can be because I think it's easy to look at a bill like that and be like, yeah, of course, like, why would we not want to help the environment, right? Like that's not really what we're debating or discussing. It's more so, right, like I want to comply to this, but how do I do it? That's really what I pulled from everything you just said is making it, clear and applicable to everybody. And because everyone's situation is different, like how do I make sure that we can all do this together and it's something that can actually get done, right? So I think that gives our listeners a really good insight into what you're doing every day because it's easy just to say, hey, I'm working on their behalf or we're trying to push for this or push for that. No, you're pushing for everybody. So we can all kind of come to common goals in the most efficient way possible is probably a good terminology for that. So
yes, definitely. Your summary is wonderful.
Yeah. No, that's great. That helps me a ton. Just knowing what you guys do, and so a lot of that policy making and stuff. It kind of starts to boil down to what regulations can we put in place that can kind of help everybody involved here, and that's where I want to start to transition to. The regulations behind supplements, because I know that's a world that the both of us kind of live in and discuss on a fairly regular basis. Yeah. So you guys represent a lot of companies that obviously manufacture dietary supplements. You go beyond that, but that's a big part of what you guys do. And your members, as we discussed at the beginning, they're kind of expected to comply with, whatever federal and state regulations are out there that are govern those kind of products. But yeah. Let's try to explain that to our listeners, right? I always tell people when I talk about supplements, like, look, supplements are regulated. Like people may tell you differently, but they are. And so from your perspective, tell us how they are. Like give us some insight into that regulation and how would you kind of suffice everything to say, all right, this is how dietary supplements are currently regulated. How would you kind of define that?
So the two agencies that regulate dietary supplements are the Food and Drug Administration and the Federal Trade Commission. And dietary supplements are ostensibly regulated at the federal level by those two agencies, specifically under FDA, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. And there's another act under that, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, a federal law enacted in 1994 that basically established a federal regulatory structure for dietary supplements. And it provides the FDA with substantial authority to protect consumers. And what that practically looks like are basically these dietary supplement regulations cover all aspects of supplement manufacturing and distribution. So from safety of ingredients to manufacturing processes requirements to product claims. all of these regulations ensure supplement products are safe and marketed to consumers in a truthful manner. So basically, some of these requirements include safety standards that are set by this regulatory structure, good manufacturing practices, adverse event reporting, which I know we'll dive into in a little bit as well, and labeling, packaging and labeling requirements, and also advertising. And this is a big part of FTC, where the FTC comes in. This is also a part where state attorneys generals also come in, because we see, particularly during COVID, where state attorney generals around the country are stepping up and issuing warning letters to companies, not just dietary supplement companies, but companies around the country that are promoting COVID cures or prevention of disease claims, health claims, like things like that are misleading consumers. That's when you see FTC or through state attorney general really playing their consumer protection role. So when we're talking about advertising in particular, or we're talking about dietary supplements making claims that are outside the scope of what FDA requires, what FDA allows, the state attorney generals and the FTC steps in. And companies that run afoul of these requirements can be subject to a host of repercussions, including injunctions, halting their business and product distribution, product recalls, product seizures altogether, fines and criminal penalties, consumer redress mandates, and even prohibitions against future advertising and conduct in an entire product category or industry.
That's a good summary, because knowing what a lot of that regulation is, we could spend a really long time talking about it. There's a lot that goes into it. I'll put notes to that, 94 Act in the show notes, so people can kind of read through that. And that's, basically what we're trying to say is, like, supplements are regulated. There are rules. And I know that that's really important to your group, is to make sure anybody that you're working with and anybody that you guys represent are complying with those regulations. I mean, you're not going to work with someone that isn't, right? You guys even take that a step further with your code of ethics, we'll talk about here in just a second. Now I want to play, I don't know if devil's advocate's the right term a little bit, all right? But let's look at that regulation a little bit further, because regulation is in place. I also know that, last time I checked, I think it's like a $45 billion industry, dietary supplements, right? I mean, it's massive, right? I know that there are companies and people out there that don't always play by the rules, right? Aren't always following these regulations, right? Like, most of them are, right? And that's a good thing, but you have your bad players in the game that kind of work around these systems and around these regulations just a little bit. So, the regulations probably better than I do. You know that these situations come up. So if you're taking the acts that are already in place and the regulations that are already in place, what are some of the changes that you would like to see, either within the regulation or just in the supplement industry as a whole?
Great. And I would also add too, in a lot of our conversations, particularly with states or in a lot of bills that we see, a lot of our advocacy turns on us explaining to states how dietary supplements are regulated as well. So it's not just a consumer education, it's also to state legislators and state regulators, because a lot of the initiatives that they attempt to put forward in that includes safety requirements, advertising, labeling, adverse event reporting, good manufacturing practices, all of those good things, they're already in place at the federal level. And then jumping into what we would like to see changed, two buckets that are definitely priority issues for us and that we're focusing on are CBD, cannabis oil, hemp-derived CBD, and mandatory product listing. So mandatory product listing, for example. So CRN engages with FDA and other stakeholders to develop a plan for mandatory listing of dietary supplement products to be administered by the Food and Drug Administration, so by FDA. In lieu of FDA's current action on this initiative, which is inaction, so there hasn't been action on this, although FDA has expressed a want to do this, CRN, our organization, has actually developed a platform that we call the Supplement OWL, and the OWL stands for Online Wellness Library, which is a dietary supplement product registry. And it's an industry-wide self-regulatory initiative that will help create a rich and more complete picture of the marketplace for regulators, retailers, and industry, and ultimately consumers. The Supplement OWL serves as a resource for these for all of these folks to identify products, their ingredients, and the companies who market them. And it permits registry users to examine and evaluate labels and other product information. And you really get this like really wonderful interaction between products that you're looking to buy and looking to research, and all this information is turned over through the supplement out by the manufacturers of these products. So we've been working with FDA over the last 2 years to develop, to either absorb the supplement out, all the information that we've already gathered, and or create a resource that would serve as a dietary supplement product registry, which I think is something that consumers are really looking for, or really want. So that's definitely an area that we would like to see moving the needle forward. We would like to see established. Another big bucket for us, particularly since 2018, has been hemp-derived CBD supplements. So in 2018, the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, it's commonly referred to as the 2018 Farm Bill, was passed. And this law basically changed certain federal authorities relating to the production and marketing of hemp, of hemp. Sorry, I said that wrong, of hemp. And how hemp was defined, basically the plant Cannabis sativa and any part of that plant, including the seeds thereof and all derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, acids, salts, and salts of isomers, whether growing or not, and with a delta 9 THC concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. So basically, what that big definition does is these changes removed hemp, the crop, from the Controlled Substances Act, which means that all of those things that are set out in that definition, and in a highlight of that, contain no more than 0.3% THC, are no longer a controlled substance on the federal level. So basically what we've seen since 2018 is industries around the country selling hemp-derived CBD products based on that definition set out in the 2018 Farm Bill. And this has been quite an issue for the last 2 years, I guess going on 3, since we're almost in 2021. CRN and industry around the country trying to get FDA to assert its authority to regulate these products. So to regulate products containing hemp or hemp-derived compounds under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, particularly dietary supplements, because as we've discussed, there's a comprehensive regulatory structure of how dietary supplements are regulated by FDA. And our contention is that hemp-derived CBD dietary supplements should be regulated at the federal level the same way or in conjunction with how all dietary supplements are regulated, because that structure is already there. In the time between December 2018 and now, the marketplace for CBD has been booming. Consumer interest is just steadily increasing. More than 20 million Americans report using hemp-derived CBD supplements, dietary supplements, and the blossoming market for CBD, combined with FDA's failure to establish a comprehensive federal framework to regulate CBD as an over-the-counter product, has produced a patchwork of state regulations and quite a chaotic marketplace, which basically means if you're a dietary supplement company, I'll pick on dietary supplement companies because those are our folks, but if you're a dietary supplement trying to sell CBD in the US, you have to comply with different regulations in Florida, New Jersey. Well, technically it's illegal still in California, which is also interesting because marijuana is legal in California, but hemp-derived CBD is not, or hemp-derived products are not. Colorado, Utah, every state that you want to do business in, you are currently have to comply with different regulations. So we're definitely pushing for federal uniformity for hemp-derived CBD dietary supplements specifically. And these are just like 2 big bucket areas that we've been advocating for and really trying to change. And it's funny because it goes back to something that I said at the beginning, which is we want to comply, right? Our companies want to comply. But how and why are you making it so difficult?
Right. Yeah, it's a perfect example of where a lack of regulation is actually hurting us. And you have people that will take advantage of the system. And that's what when I kind of mentioned before, we have players that, maybe aren't following the rules. I would just say that they're taking advantage of, situations like that, situations where, oh, look, I've got a marketplace that doesn't really have something established for me to work off of. I'm going to take that and run with it a little bit. I mean, I can take that a step further. We see products, various different types, pre-workouts, all kinds of stuff, where we'll see products that end up, having banned substances in them, having illegal drugs in them, things that could hurt people, things that could give you a positive test, right? Because, it's not that the regulation isn't in place, but they're finding ways around it, right? So knowing the regulations and even as thorough as they are now, like, is there a way that we can prevent that from happening? Like, is that even possible? Is that a realistic goal at the end of the day to stop, supplements from getting spiked or contaminated somewhere along the way?
I mean, I think that's a wonderful goal, right? Because we all are working to do that. And I think it comes down to regulation and reporting, adverse event reporting. Actually, the 1994 Dietary Supplement and Non-Prescription Drug Consumer Protection Act, a lot of words, DSHEA for short, it created a post-market surveillance program that requires supplement companies to monitor, investigate consumer adverse events and submit information about serious adverse events to FDA, but also our promotion of our advocacy for a mandatory product listing administered by FDA would require all dietary supplement companies and their ingredients be visible to regulators who definitely assist in the pursuit against illegal and adulterated products. So the regulation that we're promoting, that CRN is specifically advocating for at the federal level with FDA, would help, would definitely help in this very chaotic marketplace.
Yeah, and again, I probably asked an unfair question to say like, oh, can we ever 100% eliminate this stuff from happening? Probably not. But I do think that there are steps that can be taken. Like you mentioned, something as simple as a database, right, is got to help, right? So people aren't just blindly walking in stores and not necessarily knowing where stuff's coming from and what stuff is completely is, right? That's an easy step. And then I always encourage people, like you just said, like if you are having issues from a product, like, I mean, you have to speak up, because as the current system, basically says, like, that's how, bad players are stopped. That's how products get pulled off the shelf, is if there's, significant evidence of like, hey, like something is happening here. There's definite power by the FDA and other groups to pull that and make sure that product is being sold. So I know people can get nervous to say things sometimes, but it's actually a really crucial step in the regulation process that, helps us prevent a lot of the bad players that could be out there. So I'm with you as well. And I think one of the other steps is actually something that you guys are already doing, and that's having your own code of ethics. So you guys are obviously, very thoroughly making sure that your providers are following the regulation we've already discussed, but you're taking that a step further. You're putting a code of ethics in place that you also expect them to abide by. So give us a little more information. What does that code of ethics entail? What do you expect that those companies follow through with?
Great. So CRNS members, we all share a commitment to improving health through nutrition, including the appropriate use of dietary supplements and functional food. And, bad actors hurt everybody. Piggybacking on the last answer, bad actors hurt everybody in the industry. In pursuit of this goal, CRN's members pledge to observe and uphold the highest ethical principles in their dealings with their customers, their suppliers, competitors, regulators, and consumers in order to foster confidence in our products, or their products, I should say. In particular, CRN's Code of Ethics requires a commitment to 6 core principles, which are CRN members are committed to marketing products that will improve the personal health of consumers and the public health. Our members are committed to observing all applicable state and federal laws and regulations, which is very important. CRN members are committed to marketing dietary supplements and functional food with truthful and non-misleading labeling and advertising. We are also committed to taking appropriate action to support the safety of their products. And our members are committed to responsible self-regulation to foster consumer confidence in the quality of their products and the truthfulness of advertising. And finally, but just as important, CRN members are committed to observing fair business practices in their dealings with consumers, the general public, and other industry members as well.
Yeah, it's just, I think, a really cool thing and an extra step just to, make sure that the companies are doing it right, but also to make sure customers know, that there are good companies, that there are good suppliers, and that's who we should be finding and purchasing. If we go down that route, those are the kind of people that we want to be working with. And I applaud you guys for making sure that's happening and going even beyond the regulations that are already out there. I think that's a really cool thing.
I would actually add, Brian, it's not our policing so much as it's not our policing, it's our members' voluntary action to join CRN to comply with this code of ethics, right? It's our members' voluntary membership to an organization, to our trade association, and what that entails, which is that compliance. So it's definitely not our policing by no means. We're not a regulatory body. We're not a regulatory body. We don't police their practices. We don't go in and audit. We're not police, but we do, hold these ethics to be true, and we expect, and our members in deciding to be a member of CRN want to be a part of these kinds of principles.
Yeah, I think that's an important note. And if I was leaning, the other way by making it sound like, hey, well, your company, like you guys are the parent and you're yelling at your companies to do this. No, I think it's both sides of the coin, right? It's not just like, hey, CRN as a group wants to make sure you're following these rules. It's kind of what we were going back to earlier with some of the regulations out there. Like the companies want to comply. They want to do this. They want to do it the right way. And they're happy to, say that they're doing it through whatever it is, a code of ethics, regulations, whatever it is. Like they want to, take that and show that, hey, we care about this as much as the consumers do. Like we have your safety in mind along the way. It is something that they believe in as well. It's not hey, you're going to get in trouble if you don't do this kind of thing. It's that they believe in it, which I think is cool. And that kind of goes back to, where you guys, you see both sides of the industry and you're able to kind of look in the middle and say, all right, like there's commonality here, right? Like we have common goals here, safety being one of the biggest ones, right? So I think that's a really cool thing. So we've touched a little bit on some of those issues that you look at that apply to both sides. Are there any other legislation that you guys are currently looking on? We know we talked about the plastic thing, but just, I'm curious of further examples of what you guys are looking at now that kind of, helps both sides of this coin. What is some of the other legislation that you're focusing on? I know that I've seen something come through where there's, kind of certain supplements, age-based purchasing. Is that something you guys are looking at? Just anything else that you guys are interested in right now?
Yes, definitely. So particularly at the state level, the single-use plastics packaging issues is huge for us, particularly because that's in California. California is the world's, I think they're number 5, that has the world's 5th largest GDP. So dealing with California is very much like dealing with a small, well, I shouldn't say small, a big country. So that's a very, very important to us. But single-use plastics packaging issues also around the country as well, and recycling issues in particular, recycling and packaging issues around the country at the state and federal level are bucket areas for us. But also just diving into the age restriction legislation specifically, because this, I think, would definitely be of interest to your listeners, and it's definitely a huge issue for us. So basically, the Massachusetts state legislature a couple of years ago pushed this bill out, or introduced a bill that would put an 18-year-old or younger age restriction on weight loss and muscle building dietary supplements. So weight loss, muscle building, i.e. sports nutrition, dietary supplements. That would also require the state require retailers to limit access to these products and create a conspicuous posting requirement, which would basically be a public notice, a public posting at registers, different registers at the retailer's location that would detail all the risks involved in taking dietary supplements. A lot of the risks that were detailed in the bill have no basis in fact or science, but would also defer authority to the state departments of health to make those rules, to draft what that posting would look like. So basically, age restriction legislation on products that would also limit access and create a public notice requirement in the state was introduced, and we've worked in the state of Massachusetts in particular to not get this bill passed. And we've worked with various coalitions in the state. And what we saw, funny enough, in 2020 was the same bill reintroduced in New York State, a version of the bill reintroduced in New York City, Illinois, and California. And we're fully intending, or we're assuming that these bills will also be reintroduced next year in the 2021 legislative cycle for all of these states as well. And that's a huge area for us from a state advocacy perspective, because we are just in full opposition to this bill. It's also quite an example of coalition building and working with local and state associations and organizations, companies, to really educate legislators on what their actual intent of the bill is. Because I think, particularly with this bill, I think the legislators introducing the bill, the sponsors of these bills, really do have the best interest of their folks, of their district, of their state in mind. It's really just educating them to the practicality of this bill and what it actually does. So, for example, just casting an overly broad net on weight loss and muscle building supplements would preclude a 16-year-old high school football player, high school athlete, from going into a CVS or a Walmart or a Target and picking up a protein powder or creatine or supplements that we all know to be, or not, I shouldn't say we all know to be safe, but products that are trusted, supplements that are regulated, that we know to be safe. And it is also our contention that with this age restriction, it also, even though the limited access requirement is included, an age restriction also de facto limits access as well. And we just don't think it's necessary. Another issue for us is, which I mentioned before, hemp-derived CBD dietary supplements, and working with state legislators and regulators around the country on good language in bills and good language in laws, so that if and when, hopefully when, FDA does decide to regulate hemp-derived CBD dietary, this patchwork of state regulations will be better. will be better.
Yeah, well, it's probably a more complex issue that we could spend a whole episode on, at least in regard to the age, kind of blanket ban that we're talking about. Here's what I just pulled out of what you just said. What would probably be more effective than just, putting a blanket, hey, can't do this if you're this age kind of thing, is education. And I will tell you that is, always been the mission of our foundation, is education. And even when I speak to people, I always tell people, like, look, I'm not here to stop you from taking supplements or anything. That's not our goal. I want to educate you guys on how the industry works, what to be aware of, things like that. And I know that's a really important component to what you guys do and many of the issues that we're talking about, right? I think education can just solve a lot of our problems. So I guess my question with that is, do you agree? And if so, like, how else does the CRN educate on a lot of the issues we're talking about?
Our companies have their own education campaigns as well, which is a big component of their businesses, of their structures. And CRN, consumer education is very important to us. An example of the various initiatives that we've used throughout the years. We had a campaign called Label Wise, and Label Wise was an initiative to help consumers understand FDA mandated changes to the supplement facts label. So on all of our dietary supplements, if anyone has a bottle handy, you'll see the supplement facts label, and it's a lot of thought was put into regulating the supplement facts label, all of the things that it has to include. And we also, it's on our website as well when you give out that information, but we also have it anchored by a separate microsite, which offers a fact sheet, infographic, video, a lot of shareable social media content, but really to help consumers understand what their label says and why. And from a regulatory perspective, educating lawmakers and regulators is crucial as they regulate labeling, packaging, manufacturing practices, et cetera. All of those things that we discussed earlier on how FDA, FTC, state attorney generals regulate dietary supplements. All of those lawmakers and regulators behind the scenes are just crucial from an education perspective, from a resource sharing perspective, because all of those products we all use, we're the consumers. So education is so key.
Yeah, I just think a lot of, even outside of dietary supplements, a lot of things can be better with a bit more education behind it. So I applaud you guys for putting those resources out there and make sure that's a part of this puzzle, because I think it's a crucial one, like we said. And I want to basically end this and leave our listeners with just a little bit of education for them, right? So let's look at the consumer perspective and knowing what you know and knowing what you and I have just talked about today. If I'm out there and I'm shopping for supplements, what should I look for? What do I need to be aware of? Basically, like, what advice do you give, consumers out there that are thinking about taking dietary supplements as a whole?
Great. We would say, start with shopping at a major retailer and purchasing from a well-known company or brand that increases confidence in the product and its claims. But we always recommend using the product as directed on the label. For guidance on what to take, we would recommend speaking to a healthcare provider. Always speak to your doctor first. When it comes to doing your own research, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has the National Institute of Health Office of Dietary Supplements, which I also have that link as well. And they're a wonderful resource as well to diving in deeper into what dietary supplements you would like to take.
Yeah, I think those sound simple, but I think a lot of people just don't do that, right? But we'll put those resources in the notes. But yeah, that's why I always tell people it's not about, stopping. It's about being smart and knowing what you're doing and knowing if it's needed and talking to your doctor and just being aware of what you're buying. And those are simple steps, but they do ensure a lot more safety, take a lot of risk out of the equation. And I think it's things that I know you guys are helping with and things that anybody out there can do if they're, thinking about buying any type of supplement, whatever it may be. So I applaud
Definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just add that, if a product is making disease claims or making claims that seem too good to be true, we recommend avoiding it, take a deeper dive.
I've always said, if you're out there buying something and it's changing what you look like pretty quickly, yeah, you should probably stop taking that, right? Like if it's something where it's promising to cure a disease or it's saying, oh, you can lose 20 pounds in a month, like, some things are too good to be true. It's those warning signs that they love to use for marketing, but I'm with you, right? Sometimes you got to second guess that kind of stuff. So again,
yeah,
simple things that can go a long way. So I appreciate all the advice that you're giving our listeners. And before I let you go, I do have one more thing to throw at you that I didn't send you before. I don't know if you've tuned into any of our other podcasts, is we kind of end these things with a couple curveball questions. It's kind of what we call them.
Okay.
Just something to kind of take our minds off of a lot of the serious stuff we've been talking about, and also lets our listeners know you just a little bit better. So I'm gonna throw a couple at you. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So I took this idea of like supplements, but I really kind of took it to an extreme, right? So let's start here. Let's say there was a supplement out there I could give you, and you got two options. I can either give you something that's going to take you back in time to whatever period you want. You want to go check out the Renaissance, whatever it is, you can do that. Or you can take a product or something that's going to take you into the future. Which one are you taking?
Oh, well, that's a really hard question.
So that's why they're the curveball, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking too, because I'm particularly diving into all of our plastics issues and, parlaying into soil issues and climate change overall. I don't know about the future, so that scares me.
That's fair. It's the known versus the unknown, right? Like you could check out something that you know something about. You have no idea what you're diving into if you go down the road.
Yeah, I think maybe the past, just because I feel like I love history, so I'm kind of a history buff. So I feel like I would pick a point in time where I would feel safe enough.
It's a safe option. I think that's probably the right answer. So, all right, that works for me. I'll close it out with one more, kind of the same concept. But let's say you're taking something and maybe there's a side effect that you're noticing. All right, so would you rather that side effect either start to take away your taste buds, you're starting to lose your taste, or you're starting to go completely colorblind? You can't see any colors around you. What's the lesser of two evils for you?
Oh my gosh, I think I would go with the colorblind, because I love food so much. Like, so much. I think my waistline would probably thank me if the taste went away, because then I would just be vegan all the time and just be like, it doesn't really matter. But
I'm with you. I'll watch every movie in black and white before I get rid of knowing what my food tastes like. I think that.
Yeah, same. Same.
All right.
I love food too much.
I agree. We're ending on a common note. So, I appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions. I know they were out of the blue, but fun stuff for us to end on. And as a whole, I had fun just talking with you today. I think our listeners are going to learn a lot about the dietary supplement industry. I think it's really cool what you guys are doing, and I applaud all the work you guys will do. I'll put the website in the notes. You guys can go check out everything that they're involved with. And if you guys need more information, I'm sure Amanda would help. We're always here for any dietary supplement questions you might have as well. So Amanda, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I really enjoyed it and hope our paths cross again down the road.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening as well.
Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.